The show Silo is set in a post-nuclear future. You've got thousands of people living in a giant missile silo that is hundreds of stories underground. Nobody knows where the silo came from. Nobody knows who built it. And it's not like all these people just got plopped there one day and they were like, wonder what happened here. They don't remember because it was erased from history. 140 years before them, there was a rebellion, complete revolt, where the rebels wanted to open the door. The attempt was thwarted. The rebellion was put down, and it's now celebrated in something called Freedom Day. But 140 years ago, the rebels took a piece of history because they burned old books, and they also destroyed a lot of files. So they literally know nothing. They don't even know what caused the war. So all of these people have no idea what happened before Freedom Day, 140 years ago. Ever since then, they've continued to work as a society inside. And the reason why the silo has continued to work is because of rules put in place, like you can't go outside. If you ask to go outside, you will go outside. But those that have done that in the past, they've died. Now, there are cameras set up so you can see what's going on outside, but it's bleak. The ground looks torn up, the trees are all dead, and they're able to actually see the bodies outside of those who asked to go. So for all intents and purposes, it seems like a pretty solid community. And they have everything. They've got a mayor, they've got mechanics, they have a sheriff named Sheriff Holston. And that's where we'll start off, with Sheriff Holston and his wife, Allison. Holston is the sheriff of the entire silo. Allison, his wife, works in tech. She works in the IT department, filing paperwork and fixing computers when tickets come in. But what these two desperately want is the chance to have a baby. Now in the silo, because space is so limited, you have to be approved to have a baby. But they get approved, and it means they have 365 days to conceive a child. But after that, birth control goes back in. When they get approval, they get very excited. They quickly head to their doctor, and their doctor takes out the giant birth control that was placed inside Allison. Now, the clock is ticking. Now, the thing about getting approved for pregnancy is that everybody knows, so people start congratulating the couple. But there's one person that walks up, and she wants to help. Her name is Gloria, and she's kind of looked at as a kook. She offers to help in the fertility, and when she walks away, Allison asks her husband, what does she do? And he says she goes right to the edge of promising people a baby if they do what she says, which is fraud. Sheriff Holston doesn't think much of Gloria. Once the couple get back to their quarters, they start going at it, trying to make a baby. But afterwards, they have to head to work. Allison recently posted an article about how others can recover old files. She knows it's against the rules. She also knows, though, that it would cut down on her workload. She ends up getting reprimanded by her boss, Bernard, for this. Bernard walks away, and he looks like a guy with a stick up his ass. He ended up taking the article down. Fast forward a couple of months later, and they still don't have a baby. They're still going through their normal life, but it's frustrated the couple. But everybody in the silo is preparing for Freedom Day. The mayor is on edge. She always gets nervous around this day because it's a huge event. And if terrorism were going to happen, it would likely happen on that day. So she meets with Holston and his second-in-command, Deputy Marnes. She just wants to make sure they're prepared. And both the deputy and the sheriff convince her that everything is fine. And Freedom Day, like Freedom Days of the past, will go off without a hitch. But as the sheriff was talking to the mayor, Allison had just happened to run into Gloria. Gloria asked how the couple was doing in terms of conceiving a baby, and Allison admitted, not yet, but we're hopeful. Allison tries to get the hell out of there, but Gloria says, no, I just wanted to ask you a question, but I want to do so in private. So Allison and Gloria go back to her apartment. The first thing Gloria does is turn on the water, because as she tells Allison, I don't want Judicial to hear. And Judicial is like the silos version of the NSA, the CIA, FBI, all in a one. So just to cover her bases, she turned on the water to drown out any conversation they might have. She asked Allison, did you ever wonder what was on the servers that the rebels erased and the books they burned? If it was even the rebels who did it? Allison is starting to get uncomfortable because this conversation is illegal. But as she tries to go, Gloria stops her and says, one last thing. Do you actually think you're somebody they want having a baby? When Allison does get home that day, she does end up telling the sheriff about the conversation with Gloria, and the sheriff is pissed off about it. He wants to go arrest her, but Allison stops him and says, don't. Her and her husband couldn't have a baby, and she just wants you to look into the reason why. But as far as the sheriff's concerned, there is no reason. They just didn't conceive one in the 365-day period. That's it. The next day is Freedom Day. It's a big, big holiday, but Allison has to work. She figured that she would be on call because the sheriff was on call, and she ends up getting a ticket submitted. It's from a guy named George. He has a repair stall in the middle of the silo, and recently he's been submitting a lot of tickets. Everybody kind of dreads going there, and now it's Allison's turn. So when everybody's celebrating Freedom Day and listening to the mayor, she goes to visit George and see what's the problem. But there actually isn't one. This guy's been submitting tickets hoping that they sent Allison. They sent everybody else, but now he's finally got her. He brought her there because of what she wrote, that article about recovering old files. He knew that it wasn't a mistake. He also knew that it would be deleted soon, so he printed it out. He didn't ask for her because he didn't want to draw suspicion from Judicial. They have a law against owning relics. Basically, items before 140 years ago. They destroy all that stuff. And what he has, he doesn't know if it's a relic or not. So he didn't want to take the chance. But he wants her to look into it. He's got this old drive that was found by somebody about a year ago. He fired it up, it looked empty, but then he tried what she wrote, and there are files on it. The computer says most of the drives are in use, but he can't find any files. So he needs Allison's help. She sits down and starts going over some techniques, looking for these missing files, and after a few hours, she finally finds them. It's the silo's blueprints. It's really exciting to George, but it's pretty scary to Allison. She knows that if they're caught doing this, they're both going to be in big, big trouble. So she quickly leaves, letting Mark look over the stuff. It's all she can really think about. She certainly isn't focusing on having a baby, which is all the sheriff is thinking about. Although at this point, it's kind of becoming a chore. The next day, she calls out of work and heads to Gloria's and says, okay, why don't they want us to have children? And Gloria tells her it's because they don't want people that think independently to have children, raising independent children who might cause a revolution or a revolt. So they keep the birth control inside of them, making them think that they took it out. It's pretty crazy, but Allison has now tried to have a baby 3 different times, and she's been unsuccessful, so she's starting to believe it. The day after that, she also calls out of work, although this time she heads to go meet with George. She tells George, I want to see everything, and he opens up all of the files. The last file they look at is a video file of the outside, although it's like nothing they've ever seen before. The grass is green, the trees have bloomed, and you gotta remember that Allison has lived her entire life in the silo, looking at the same visual. So this is blowing her mind. When she gets out of there, she cannot concentrate at all. All she's thinking about was how they've been lied to their entire life. When the sheriff alerts her that they have a meeting with the doctor the next day because their 365 days is up, Allison says, yeah, that's cool, I'll meet you there. But when it comes time to actually show up for that meeting, Allison's nowhere to be found. The doctor, the sheriff, they wait for a little bit, but finally the sheriff goes looking for her. And he finds her in their house in a sort of subdued state. She sits him down and says, we need to talk. I knew that if I told you this, I would need proof, so I got it. She doesn't rat Gloria out, but she tells the sheriff Gloria's theory, that they were never going to let him have kids. The enforcers want docile people, not people like her. It's really hard for the sheriff to believe, but she says, well, I have proof. He didn't take out my birth control because I just did. And she's holding her birth control pill that was injected into her, and she's bleeding pretty badly. When the sheriff sees that, he rushes into action, running to go get the doctor, and he's stopped by Deputy Marnes, who lets him know that his wife is in the cafeteria causing quite a scene. After the sheriff left, Allison went to the cafeteria and started telling everybody that everything that they've known so far is a lie. That outside, it doesn't look like that bleak landscape. She's bleeding pretty badly, and she seems like she's going off the deep end, and the sheriff tries to calm her down, But then she says the 5 words that you are not supposed to utter. I want to go outside. And once someone says that, it's done. They get arrested and prepared to be sent outside. The sheriff knows what it means. And he also took an oath. So when he, the deputy, and the mayor all convene about the situation and they try to figure out a way where they can kind of save Allison, he says no. I mean, we'll look into it, but everybody heard her say, I want to go outside. And by looking into it, they question Gloria, and they also bring George in. George admits to seeing Allison, but also says she never came back. And when the judicial team searches his stall, they don't find anything. That's because George hid it really, really well. So unfortunately, there's nothing left to do. Right before Allison is supposed to be suited up and sent out, Sheriff Holston goes and has a conversation with her. She swears that she's not crazy, and that outside, it's beautiful. She uncovered all this stuff about the lying, but the biggest one is the fact that if she gets sent out there, she won't die. Judicial has the ability to change what they see on the screens, and they're using some kind of filter to do it. The sheriff still doesn't believe any of this, and she says, well, think about it. I mean, the people that were sent out there, the most recent ones, they swore that they wouldn't clean. But then they got out there, and what did they do? The first thing they did, they cleaned. And it's because they wanted us to see what they were seeing. So I'll tell you what, when I get out there, if I am wrong, if it is as bleak as it looks right now, then I will just walk away. But if I am right, if it is beautiful out, then I will clean. And you will know that I am telling the truth. They then have to get Allison suited up, and it's really emotional for the sheriff because he has to kind of read her rights. But then they send Allison out. And this is an event that the entire silo watches. They get really pumped to see whether or not the person sent out does clean. The sheriff, though, watches alone in his jail cell. Everybody else is really excited when Allison walks up to the camera and cleans it. But the sheriff, now he's thinking differently because he's remembering what it meant if his wife were to clean those cameras. He then watches as Allison tries to walk over the hill, but she stumbles, falls to the ground, and seemingly dies like everybody else before her. 2 years later, the sheriff is still the sheriff. Although the pain in his heart from watching Allison die hasn't gone away, especially considering every day he looks out, he sees her body. Since the loss of Allison, the sheriff has become pretty despondent. Deputy Marnes, though, comes to him one day and says, I got something you should see. George, the guy who Allison went to in the market, he's turned up dead. Looks like he fell off the stairs. People are thinking it's a suicide. But no one saw him go over, and there's an engineer all the way at the bottom that thinks it's murder. So Marnes and the sheriff go to investigate. They look over the body, and then they go to meet with the engineer who made the claim. Her name is Juliet Nichols, and this is the first time that the sheriff is meeting Juliet. And a short time after he meets Juliet, the sheriff does exactly what Allison did. He wrote a couple of goodbye notes to some people, he locked himself in the jail cell, and he told the deputy, I want to go outside. Now, the deputy noticed a change between the sheriff after he met Juliet, because the sheriff was dead inside until he met Juliet. So something changed. And he asked the sheriff, what was it? And the sheriff says, I finally started listening to what my wife wanted me to hear. So I'm going to go outside, and I'm going to find her. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you left a comment, I don't get back to you. I usually don't check the comments unless they're like a super comment. Also, if you don't see the next video up on the end screen, not to worry, it'll be up in a day or two.